They say he was terrified of flies, so terrified that he ordered his servants to coat themselves in honey, just to lure the insects away from his perfect royal skin. But that's only one glimpse into the mind of Egypt's most twisted ruler, Pepi II. In this video, we will discuss the life of a king who reigned for nearly a century, and whose pleasures turned his palace into something closer to hell. Pepi II was only 6 years old when he ascended the throne of Egypt. His father, Nemtiemsaf I, was gone, and the Old Kingdom, the wealthiest, most powerful civilization on earth, placed its faith in a child. His coronation marked not just the rise of a new ruler, but the beginning of Egypt's slow descent into darkness. At first, the empire was stable. The royal palace at Memphis pulsed with life, filled with priests, scribes, and courtiers, bowing to the small boy seated on a gilded throne. But the true ruler of Egypt was his mother, Queen Pepi II. She served as regent, guiding every decision through her council, and her brother, Jiao, the vizier. A statue from that era shows her holding young Pepi on her lap, the divine mother nurturing the divine child, yet even in stone, it hints at the imbalance of power that defined his early years. During these first years, Egypt thrived. Trade routes stretched deep into Nubia and across the Red Sea. Gold, incense, and rare animals filled the royal storehouses. In one surviving letter, the letter to Harkhuf, the young Pepi writes with childlike excitement to a governor who had found a pygmy who dances the dance of the god. He promised rich rewards if the man is brought back safely. It's an innocent request on the surface, almost charming. But it also reveals something deeper, a fascination with novelty, with control, and with being entertained. The boy king's curiosity would one day harden into obsession. For now, though, Egypt knelt before its child god, unaware that the seeds of decay had already been planted. But as the child god became a man, the kingdom that once worshipped him began to fall apart quietly. As Pepi II grew older, Egypt began to slip from his grasp. The same system that once made the Pharaoh untouchable was fracturing, not with war or rebellion, but with quiet defiance. Far from the royal palace, the nomarchs, Egypt's provincial governors, started acting like kings in their own right. They collected taxes meant for the crown, raised their own armies, and carved lavish tombs that rivaled those of the pharaohs themselves. Inscriptions once dedicated to the living god now praised local rulers. The divine order of Egypt, Ma'at, was fading. While the god-king sat in his palace, Egypt began tearing itself apart. Even nature turned against him. The Nile's floods, the lifeblood of the empire, became unpredictable, too high one year, too low the next. Crops failed, granaries emptied, and famine spread across the land. In the villages, whispers grew louder. Perhaps the boy who ruled forever had lost the favor of the gods. Back in Memphis, Pepi's reign continued, not with grandeur, but with exhaustion. His name was still spoken in prayers, but the monuments built in his honor told a different story. The pyramids of his ancestors had soared toward the heavens. Pepi's own funerary pyramid was smaller, hastily built, its walls crudely decorated. The precision and artistry that once defined Egypt's glory were decaying, stone by stone, and century by century. What had begun as the longest reign in history was becoming the slow suffocation of a kingdom. The great civilization that once defined eternity was rotting from within, and its god-king, still alive, was watching it die. But absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it festers, and in Pepi's endless reign, decay soon gave way to obsession. As the years stretched on, Pepi II ceased to be a boy king and became something else entirely, a ruler consumed by his own divinity. His name had once carried the promise of eternal order, but decades of unchecked power warped that promise into something grotesque. No one alive could remember a time before Pepi's reign. Generations were born, served, and died under the same ruler. The god-king never aged in official portraits, but inside the palace walls, he was changing. The line between reverence and fear began to blur. The first glimpse into his madness comes from a story whispered through the ages, the tale of the honey slaves. Pepi, it was said, could not bear the sight of flies. The insects that tormented ordinary men had no right to touch a living god. So he commanded that his servants be coated in honey, their glistening bodies turned into living fly traps. While they stood helpless and swarmed, Pepi sat nearby, serene and untouched. It sounds absurd, almost theatrical, but that's what makes it so chilling. The story endures not for its spectacle, but for what it says about power unrestrained. A man who believed himself divine no longer saw others as human. Their suffering was part of the ritual that affirmed his perfection. Another story reaches back to his youth, the letter to Harkuf, when Pepi excitedly demanded that a pygmy who dances the dance of the god be brought to him alive. As an adult, that curiosity grew into obsession. Dwarfs, entertainers, exotic animals, his court became a menagerie of living amusements. Visitors described halls filled with jesters, dancers, and performers chosen for their rarity, not their talent. To Pepi, they were objects of fascination, not people. Some scholars doubt these tales. They may be exaggerations, inventions by later chroniclers horrified by what Egypt became under his rule. But even myths have roots in truth. The honey, the dancers, the endless indulgence, they reflect a deeper reality, the psychological decay of absolute rule. Pepi II reigned for more than 90 years, the longest reign in recorded history. For nearly a century, no one contradicted him, no one corrected him, no one dared say no. His every desire was fulfilled, his every fear erased by decree. And when a man is treated as a god for that long, perhaps humanity itself begins to feel beneath him. But obsession always hungers for something darker, and soon Pepi's indulgence would cross a line even the gods weren't meant to breach. Toward the twilight of Pepi II's reign, a strange story began to circulate. One so scandalous that even centuries later, Egyptian scribes could barely write it down. It appears in a fragmentary papyrus known as the Tale of King Neferkare and General Sassanet. Though written long after Pepi's time, many scholars believe Neferkare was simply another name for the old king himself. The tale describes how, under the cover of darkness, the pharaoh would leave his palace alone, disguised, and slip through the streets of Memphis to visit one of his generals. There, the text says, he would remain doing what he desired for 4 hours. No further explanation was needed. In ancient Egypt, such phrasing left little to the imagination. A palace spy eventually witnesses the secret, reporting that the god-king of Egypt, the embodiment of divine order, was sneaking away for trysts with another man. What followed was silence. No confrontation, no punishment, only whispers preserved in ink and fragments. The meaning of this tale remains uncertain. Some historians see it as political satire, a coded critique of royal corruption. Others think it was a moral fable, warning that even gods could fall to temptation. And some believe it may preserve a grain of truth, a private scandal reshaped into allegory over centuries. To later Egyptians, the story of a divine ruler engaged in forbidden love was more than indecent. It was a sign of moral collapse. A god who broke the natural order could only bring ruin upon his kingdom. And so, in the final decades of his endless reign, Egypt's living god wandered the night seeking something even a throne could not give him, the feeling of being human again. According to the historian Manetho, Pepi II ruled Egypt for 94 years, the longest reign in all of human history. Even if the true number was closer to 64, it was still an eternity for a man of that age and era. Pepi had outlived his advisors, his generals, his family, and in a way, his own kingdom. What happens when a man outlives his world? In the final decades of his reign, Pepi's decrees carried less and less weight. Officials obeyed in writing but ignored him in practice. The once centralized empire fractured into rival provinces. Nomarchs hoarded grain and gold, and the Nile Valley sank into famine and chaos. Still, the palace clung to its rituals. Every 30 years, a pharaoh was expected to perform the said festival, a grand ceremony to prove his strength and divine vitality. Pepi II celebrated not one, but several of them, each more hollow than the last. In theory, the king was to run a sacred race before the gods, symbolizing his eternal vigor. In reality, the run of the aging Pepi was almost certainly ceremonial. The frail god carried in a litter, while attendants pretended to cheer. The gesture was meant to renew his power. Instead, it exposed how fragile that power had become. By the end, he was less a ruler than a relic, a living mummy watching his empire rot. The once golden throne now sat in silence, surrounded by whispers, crumbling walls, and honey-smeared servants. When Pepi II finally died, Egypt did not mourn, it simply exhaled. The old kingdom, The age of the pyramid builders ended with him. The god who reigned forever had proven one final truth: even eternity can decay. When Pepi II finally died, Egypt was already broken. The god who had ruled for nearly a century left behind no empire, only the illusion of one. His successor, Merenre II, barely had time to wear the crown before the world he inherited fell apart. Records of his reign fade almost immediately, swallowed by chaos. Across the Nile Valley, the nomarchs, the provincial governors who once served the throne, declared themselves independent. Egypt fractured into rival kingdoms, each ruled by men who claimed divine favor of their own. Without a strong central authority, the systems that had sustained Egypt for centuries began to unravel. Tombs were robbed, temples abandoned, and irrigation channels fell into ruin. The Nile's irregular floods turned famine into a permanent shadow. For over 100 years, the land descended into what historians call the First Intermediate Period, a time of anarchy, civil war, and despair. Scribes of later dynasties looked back on this age with horror. They called it the time when men ate their children. Hyperbole, perhaps, but the message was clear. The divine order had collapsed. Historians often mark Pepi II's reign as the breaking point, the moment when Egypt's faith in God kingship finally failed. His endless rule had drained the throne of its mystery, leaving only bureaucracy and decay. The pharaoh who would not die had outlived not just his people, but the very idea of divine kingship itself. The pyramids still stood, glinting in the desert sun, but Egypt's soul had cracked. Across the sands of Egypt, Pepi II's monuments still stand, but they no longer speak of glory. They whisper of decay, of a god who ruled too long, and a kingdom that forgot how to die. In the end, even eternity has an expiration date.